I would tell them that by affiliating with somebody like Nick Fuentes, you are going to damage your entire movement. And the far left, and I'll get to this in just a second, but it's called, there's a term for it, it's called reciprocal radicalization. And this is what we're seeing in American politics today, where the extremes on both sides, the right and the left, are fueling one another, and they're pulling more and more moderates from the moderate left and right out to those fringes, and that's really dangerous. And I think that's what Nick Fuentes and people like him are specifically doing, is they're fueling those narratives. So if the left is going to say everybody on the right's a Nazi, and you platform somebody like that guy, then they can say, it's true, it's true. They're racists, they're anti-Semites. That's what's going on there. It's just like what we said. So then they're going, so for anybody that's strategizing on the right, affiliating with him is toxic.
Welcome to the podcast. My name is Rabbi Daniel Schonbuch. I'm here with my co-host, attorney Lori Fein, and we have a very special guest today. His name is Jeff Schoep. He is the former leader of the National Socialist Movement, the NSM. It was once one of the largest Nazi organizations in America, but he's left his extremism behind, and he's just written a great book called American Nazi, From Hate to Humanity. Jeff, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me, Rabbi Schonbuch.
It's really exciting to meet you from so many different perspectives. But number one is it's the Viktor Frankl podcast, who you know about the life of Viktor Frankl, who's a Holocaust survivor. He survived Auschwitz, and he also had a mission of helping people find meaning and, fighting extremism. Before we get into what's happening politically today, things about Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and other topics of that nature, I want to just have the audience learn about your history. It's so fascinating. Tell us a bit about how a young teenager from the Midwest gets involved in Nazism and becomes involved with one of the biggest Nazi organizations in the United States.
Well, my journey into extremism was a little different than a lot of Americans. In particular, I had a family connection, and I want to say that with a caveat. My grandfather fought in Hitler's army during World War II. My great uncles fought as well, and I knew that history growing up, but it wasn't something that was taught in our home. Like, this is a good thing, you should be involved in it. In fact, it was quite the opposite. I was told basically don't ask questions about it, because I always wanted to ask my grandfather questions, because as a young man growing up, it wasn't even the politics of it that came later. That came after I joined being propagandized and all that. But early on as a kid, I looked up to my grandfather and I thought, wow, Nazis are cool. This is a cool thing to be involved in. Obviously, I know now it's not, and it's not something people should be attracted to. But for me, it was that historical connection and that fascination with that family history. So I just there's no excuse for it or anything like that. It's just that was the entry point for me. For a lot of young people that are attracted to stuff, it can be a sense of belonging. It can be all kinds of different things. But for me, it was that initially that was that historical family connection.
Was your family aware? Were they supportive in any way?
No, they weren't. I think they just thought like it was just a curiosity or something as a kid growing up. I was on my own at pretty much after 16. I was basically thrown out of the house, got in some trouble, and not really trouble, but like not listening to my parents, not wanting to go to school, things like that. So I was kind of on my own at that point, and they couldn't just not listening, not following the rules at home. And it wasn't that they were that terribly strict. I was just that rebellious and out of in a wrong in that sense. So once I got involved, then they definitely were just trying to discourage it, and they didn't encourage it at all as I was growing up either. But once I got involved, they were very much discouraging of it. Even my grandfather had said to me at one point, Laura, he had said, he says, Jeff, the path that you are on is going to lead to one of two places, prison or death. And I was so radical at that point. I was like, you might have given up, but I'll never stop fighting for my people. And I rose my voice, and I was quite rude and disrespectful.
When you say my people, you're talking probably about white males, white Americans. So this was an organization, a group of people you got connected with. How do you go from interest in German history and Nazism to be connected with this type of group? What are the steps people do to get connected to that?
Well, I mean, it's different now than I think than it was back then. Back when I got involved was the early 90s. So you didn't have a lot of computers, and I mean you had some of that stuff, but that was like the early days of the internet and all that. So in today, unfortunately, when young people are getting involved in this stuff, it's a couple clicks on a keyboard and they can find these groups. I had to search it out. So I don't blame anybody. You know, like a lot of people say, well, my uncle taught me to hate, my grandfather, my parents, you know, all this kind of stuff. I don't blame anybody else except for myself on that. And I was actually searching this stuff out. And the connection for me came strangely enough was I was reading a lot of books and I found a book at the library that was, I believe it was written by a sociologist, and it had like all the groups, all these American Nazi groups and um Christian identity and militias and all these different kind of groups that participated in this book, or did interviews for this book, were listed in the back book index. So at that point, I found that book and I was like, here we go. Here's all the addresses. I'm going to start writing to these groups, and that's kind of how it started.
Well, you moved from just being interested and involved to taking on the leadership of the movement. This took many years to do. How did you become the leader of this movement?
It happened pretty fast, actually. Like when I joined, when and I skipped a little couple parts because there's so many different angles to the story. But when I finally met up with groups, I met with a Christian identity group actually in Minnesota, because there was no groups in the really no groups that I could find in the book that were active in the state. So they put me in touch with groups that were in the state, and then I went and met up with everybody that was local. And my thinking was, is I wanted to join something that was as close to the German movement as possible, like on the American side of things. So I found an organization, which at the time, the National Socialist Movement formed in like 73, 74. And there was but at the time I joined it, it was called National Socialist American Workers Freedom Movement, but and it was a pretty small organization. And I've met with the different groups in Minnesota, some skinhead groups and other groups, and but that particular organization, because it was so old, and it was the head of it was connected to George Lincoln Rockwell, the original founder of the American Nazi Party. There was that historical connection. That's what led me to that organization, even though the other groups were more close to my age or in interests and things like that. It was that historical connection that I sought out that group. So at the time it was small. I got involved and quickly rose up through the ranks, became local group leader, um, was doxed on a radio program. And before that, you know, politics was sort of like a side piece for me. It was a side interest. Music was number one. I was a singer in a long-haired rock and roll band, if you can even believe that. But that was my goal. That's what I wanted to do. After I was doxed, um, I gave up on that because I saw what after being doxxed, it destroyed my mother's career, and I
She
felt
was a
like it would
judge,
destroy
right?
the.
She was going to be a judge or something of that nature?
Yeah, she was an attorney, and she was elected to be a judge, and was not allowed to take her seat on the bench, even though she was elected to it. So, um, yeah, that's I carry a lot of guilt and shame for that. That changed my trajectory in life, really did.
Was it shortly after that time that you left this world?
What
What
do
was
you
the
mean?
how did the timing line up?
Oh, as far as like when I got doxxed, I was about 19 years old, so we're talking early 90s. And
Oh, so it was very shortly after you joined the movement.
oh yeah, yes.
So in other words, it drove you to become even more involved.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't articulate that very well, but yes, when I got doxxed, that changed my trajectory shifted in life because I was, like I said, in a long-haired rock and roll band. So I mean, I've got my hair tucked up in a hat when I'm doing this political stuff and basically like a disguise in a sense, you know. So once I got doxxed, I and my mother's career got destroyed. Um, it was like I can't do this to the band. I'll ruin the band's chances at making it as well. So I quit the band, shaved my head, and put all the energy I'd put into music into the movement. And again, you know, I want to say that like I don't want to say, oh, that because that lady doxed me, this all happened and blame her for it. Because again, it was my own poor choices that led me down this path. But at 19 years old, you know, I feel like there was still an opportunity to maybe change, and I wish that wouldn't have happened. But you can't change your past.
And what are some of the things that a Nazi movement does when you're involved with? What are some of the activities? Was it demonstrating? Was it political activism? Was there violence? Tell us about some of that, the inner world stuff that happens in the life of a Nazi in America.
Right. So I'm getting involved and I'm quickly rising up through the ranks. And within a couple of years, the guy that was running the organization decided it was time for him to retire. And he asked me to take over the group. And I thought, oh, this is not something I aspired for or something that I wanted. But I felt, you know, I'd made the choice and I accepted the position. And but one of the things before that happened, one of the things that he showed us um, when I first got involved was something he called the one man picket. And he went into downtown Minneapolis in front of like a federal building and with the uniform and a swastika flag and was demonstrating and said, you know, you two guys myself and another new recruit don't intervene if I get attacked or anything like that. I'm going to show you that one person can, you know, throw a protest in downtown Minneapolis, which we called Red Minneapolis at the time because it was we aligned it with communism is how we viewed that. So it was like we'll go right in the heart of enemy territory, and one man can do this himself. So that tactic was demonstrated to me on that day, and then from there you know, the group would pass out literature, would go into different neighborhoods, would do walking pickets. Later, it would become larger rallies and things like that as I built up the organization. But early on, it was a lot of like literature distribution, newspaper distributions in some cases. If we teamed up with like another group that had a paper or things of that nature, it was basically just growing the ranks and you know, things of that nature. But later on, that became a lot more complex, and the group branched out into podcasting, into producing videos. It had its own media department, press release people, developed video games, terrible video games, everything you could imagine for recruitment purposes.
What were in some of those video games? It was killing people, attacking Jews. What was the content of those games that people are playing?
The games, and I almost hesitate to even name them. I mean, we can name them, but
Without
you
the
know what?
name, what's the content?
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, yes, because I don't want people to look these things up if they're still out there circulating. But the content of the games was awful. They were first person shooters. There was two of them, and in the first one, the narrative was something like Jews were taking over NSM headquarters and they had outlawed free speech, and it's your job to, and I might have the two versions mixed up here, but it was your job to like free the NSM headquarters from the Jewish occupation and then take back the headquarters. And I think in the second one, Jews had taken over the whole city or the whole country, and your job was to bust out of jail and then go and fight and things like that. So it was pretty grotesque.
Was it specifically aimed at Jews as the enemy, or were there other enemies too, like the Klan had African Americans as their enemies as well?
With the Nazi movement specifically, the Jews are be all end all of that. They view it as the Jews are like these puppet masters pulling the strings, and that the other races, of course, Nazis don't like anybody. They hate all the races, but the other races are sort of like considered like symptoms of the problem, and that the Jews are at the top controlling it all. That's basically how the mindset works. So where you look at the Klan, where the main enemy is African Americans, with the Nazi movement, the main enemy is Jewish people.
And one of the main things you see here is that the Jews are on the top of the chain in terms of the oppressors, and they're kind of the cause of the perceived failures among white men in America. Would that be correct from your perspective?
I'm glad you articulated it like that, because it really does explain it well. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. Like, from the outside looking in, a lot of time, and I've heard people that have come out of these movements explain it like that. They articulate it as I was filled full of hate, and that hate was what the driving factor. I don't see it like that. Hate is a byproduct. And where does hate come from? Nobody wakes up one day and just says, well, like, I hate people. Like, if that's you, then you might have some other psychological issues going on beyond that, because that nobody just wakes up and just hates people for no reason. This hate is based on fear, and the fear comes from, and if you break it down psychologically and you look at the mantras of some of these movements, even in recent years, where they say like the Jews will not replace us, and white replacement theory, and a lot of these different theories and concepts that they have, is that they're being replaced, they're going to be taken over, and where does that what is that? That's fear. Even the messaging, like, we will not be replaced, like, that's fearful messaging. And what does that do? That drives people to hate, and that fuels hatred, and that fuels rage and anger, and if someone's afraid, then they lash out quite often, and that can be very detrimental to our society, and the individual themselves and everybody around it. Hate creates a ripple effect. It destroys everything and everyone in its path. And my family and journey is a perfect example of that. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote American Nazi, From Hate to Humanity, was to tell that story and to show people what it was like and what it takes to get out, and that there is still that redemptive arc. And if you don't mind, I'd like to quote Viktor Frankl on that, because he is a wonderful philosopher, and he says, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to save or change ourselves. I think that says it all. Sorry.
One of the questions I always have is, where does the hatred get directed towards Jews? Why is that the target of hatred? I mean, certainly, there's visible Jews in the country, but it's still a very tiny minority. Even among successful or powerful people, you still only have a very small fraction of which is Jewish. And yet people who are feeling alienated or left behind somehow choose to direct their anger and their vitriol against the Jews. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's as nonsensical as how you just explained it. It's not rational. It's not based in any real solidified truth or anything like that. But when you're wrapped up in this mindset, and again, I don't make excuses for it. All I can do is explain the psychological drivers and the psychology of it, because there is no excuse. But it's easier to scapegoat someone else, to scapegoat another person or group of people, than be able to look in the mirror and say, you know what? I need to work harder. I need to do better. I need to strive harder. It's easier for someone to say, okay, here's the enemy. These are the people, or this is the group that's holding you back. This is why you can't succeed. This is why you struggle to feed your family. This is why you struggle to get ahead. Again, back to that fear factor thing. If someone's struggling to pay the bills, and a lot of Americans are in these situations where they're living paycheck to paycheck, many of us have been there in our lives. And it's like, when you're in that situation, it's hard to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm working my butt off every day and I'm not getting ahead. whose fault is this? And again, it's not rational and it's not real, but it's easier to scapegoat another group of people. So I think a lot of the people in the movement, they see Jewish people, a lot of them, as being very successful and very wealthy. And what they'll do is find those people that fit those narratives, like at the top. Because I remember there was leaflets that the group would pass out, and they would say, like, the head of all these TV stations were the CEOs or whatever were Jews, and they weren't always. But the way that the propaganda of this movement works is, you would paint it that way. And sometimes there was even, this is since I left the movement, but there was flyers that were being circulated in Chicago, and for example, there was a few people on the flyer, a few Jewish people. I know a lot of the Jewish community in Chicago and Skokie area there, and there was people that were on one of those flyers that weren't even Jewish, that were being called Jewish, that were on the flyer. And there was some of the people on the flyer, for example, like Senator Lori Fein, who was a friend of mine. She was on the flyer as well. So they will target people in any way they can.
Well, let's move on now to your transformation, because you rightfully commented on Viktor Frankl's comment: if you can't change your situation, you're left with the ultimate of all human freedoms, to change yourself. So, Jeff, you actually decided to change yourself. And in your book and in some of your interviews, you talked about a guy named Daryl Davis, an African American I've never actually heard of before, but he was very prominent in your change. Was he the reason for you changing? So just talk about Daryl, his work, how you met him. Was he just part of you changing? Were you changing already? Was he part of that process, or was he the one that got you out of this neo-Nazi movement?
Well, it's Daryl and I today are like brothers. A little bit of background on him. He's an African American musician. He played with Chuck Berry, Little Richard, um, all kinds of different. I say Elvis too. I don't know if he played with Elvis or was Elvis's
You might
band,
be
but he knew.
a little too young for El, but it's amazing because you yourself are a rock guitar, you're a musician yourself. So that's part of the connection,
Yes.
perhaps.
Yes. So when I met Daryl, there's a lot of factors that go into the change, but I feel like Daryl was the one that planted the first major seed. So outside of his music career, what Daryl is known for is helping people leave the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazi groups, but the Ku Klux Klan in specific, because he was the first African American to write a book on the Klan, and he would actually go and meet these guys, attend cross lightings and things like that, and that is unheard of. Like, that does not happen. He's a very fascinating individual, and I had been contacted by a documentary film crew at the time of when I was meeting Daryl. They didn't tell me I was meeting Daryl Davis. They just said, "Hey, we're doing this film. This guy's would interview you, ask you questions about the movement." And in my trajectory, this was an opportunity to spread the propaganda of the movement. So I checked the film company out. Okay, it's legit. It's not a setup. It looks like a real company. Sure, I'll go meet you guys. And I'm sitting on this bench outside Chris's Hot Dogs who's in Birmingham, Alabama. It's where Hank Williams wrote the song "Hey Hey Good Looking." And I'm sitting outside with my girl at the time, and this vehicle pulls up, and this big black man steps out and walks towards me, extends his hand, says, "Hi, I'm Daryl Davis. You must be Jeff Schoep." So I stood up and shook his hand, and we started talking, and I was thinking, man, I know this guy's name and I know his face, but it didn't quite click yet because I was focused on, what the task at hand going in for this interview. I said, where do I know this guy from? I've seen his face. And it wasn't until we sat down that it clicked. Oh, this is the guy that gets people out of the Klan. I would have still went to the interview, but I would have probably prepared a little more for it, because this would have been a debate, this guy was known in the movement for pulling people out. So I think I would have prepared a little better. I still would have done it. But I realized during this talk, we're getting along too well. So, and now, Daryl and I go across the country and we give talks about this, and he'll say, well, Jeff slipped into Nazi mode, because I realized we're getting along too well. The cameras are rolling, we're filming. I'm like, boy, this isn't good. I'm getting along with this guy like I just met an old friend. And so I slammed my fist on the table and I said, Daryl, I'll fight to the last bullet for my people. And Daryl didn't change his mannerisms, the way he addressed me, the way we talked. He just went, and continued the conversation. So that kind of pulled me in. But it was what it was he explained to me about how racism and hate affected him as a child growing up. And he talked about being in the Boy Scouts at like 10, 11 years old. And he was being pelted with rocks by white adults in this Boy Scout parade. And he had to be pulled out of the parade, was rushed home. His parents asked, what happened to you? Why are you all banged up? And he says, well, I think some people didn't like the Boy Scouts. And they were throwing rocks at us and bottles and things. And they had to explain to him, no, Daryl, that's because you were black. And he says, no, Jeff, for the first time in my life, my parents were lying to me. That didn't make any sense. That didn't make any sense whatsoever. How could someone hate me when they don't even know me? And I tell you what, Rabbi, that no one ever approached me like that in all the years that I was involved. People told me I was wrong. My family told me I was wrong. I had experienced law enforcement raids on my home. I'd been survived assassination attempts, all kinds of things over the years. Terrible things happened to me. Nothing came close to getting me out of these movements. In fact, every lash of the proverbial whip increased my radicalization and made me more entrenched. Just like early on being doxed, it made me more radical, more determined, and every threat, every attack, every act of violence, it just solidified my belief system and pushed me into that. And that's something we see that's quite common with the majority of people that are in these movements when it's approached in that way. But Daryl's approach was humanistic. And when you dehumanize another human being, I feel like you lose your humanity in the process. I'd lost my humanity a long time ago. And Daryl Davis, when he explained how my ideology affected him as a child, I'm trying to place it in a box. I'm in my mind at the time to give you a peek into the psychology of this. I'm going, okay, these are some bad people. That wasn't me. That wasn't my organization. First, it's not me. That's not my organization. And you start breaking it down and you try to set it over here in a box and go, we wouldn't do that to a child. But there's people in the movement that would, so it's like there's this cognitive dissonance going all the time in that role. And I'm trying to set it aside and not see it that way and see it like, no, this is a noble cause. This is a grand cause. We're fighting for our people. We're doing good things. It's not like that. And not too long after meeting Daryl, I'd met a Muslim filmmaker by the name of Dia Khan. And this was the film White Right Meeting the Enemy. And she had a similar approach. And that between meeting those two and living here in Detroit and just interacting with people of different races more often and having a lot of other experiences, it all started adding up. It wasn't, I'd love to say it was a snap of a fingers. Like when I met Daryl Davis, that was the end of it. But it's typically, it doesn't work that fast. It's a process and it takes time. And I know a couple of cases. I know a few cases, but I could probably count them on one hand of people that switched and left the ideology over like one act of kindness or one major event. But for most people, it's a process and it takes time because you have to unravel all this. I beat myself up a lot over it because I was like, why didn't I leave after I met Daryl? And I was one time Daryl and I were talking and I was beating myself up over that. I was like, man, how stupid was I? I met Daryl in 2016. I didn't leave until March of 19. Why did it take me so long? And he says, Jeff, I know the way your mind works and you had to try every single thing you could first before you broke away from that. And a lot of people don't understand the dynamics of it, but it's like a cult. You're involved in this. Everybody you know is in that echo chamber. Your whole world is in it. In my case, as the leader, also my business was wrapped up into it. So my career, everything that I'd worked for, everybody that I knew, and I had this semblance of power, I guess you could say. So these are all things that would like hold somebody in place. And then there was I still don't like the word fear, but there's those fears that come back in like, well, will society see me as anybody else other than who I was for all this time? Like, so I'm trying to fix the organization, fix in quotes, air quotes, for anybody that's just listening and can't hear or can't see what how we're discussing this, but I was trying to fix it. And I explained this in schools like I was trying to put lipstick on a pig. You can dress up the Nazi party and try to make it look pretty, but it's still a pig. It's still not pretty. And this is what I was trying to do, because I'm telling the press the last few years that I was involved and everybody that I'm talking to, this isn't a hate group. It's not even a don't even call us Nazis. I was saying at some points in time, I said, it's a white civil rights organization. You go, my gosh, this is the Nazi party. What is this guy talking about? But that was the changes that were going on in my head. So I was trying to switch the organization to so-called fix it. Well, there is no fixing it, but and eventually by the time 2019 rolled around, I was like, man, I got it. You can't fix this, Jeff. You need to leave and you need to speak out against it and you need to do something good for humanity.
Jeff, it's interesting to hear you talk about that as a civil rights movement and your ultimate decision that there was no saving this organization from its origins, if you will. But, you know, it's interesting because a lot of the exact same phrasing, it's a civil rights movement, it's looking out for the rights of white Americans, etc., is really the exact same language that we're hearing from people who, to my knowledge, have no affiliation with any Nazi or extremist groups, but you have, you know, popular media personalities now who are reflecting these exact same views that, you know, white male, in particular Americans, have had a hard time, which I think that many people could, you know, observe that, and are again pointing to various groups by race and particularly to the Jews. So how do you see the difference between what people consider, you know, currently mainstream people expressing these exact same views that you're now saying you disavowed when you left the Nazis?
Oh, that's a lot to unpack, Laura. It's it's really disturbing to see a lot of these things coming kind of mainstream. I think it's really dangerous. And it's also under false pretenses, you know. It's the same pill that I had fallen for, or the same rotten outlook on life, that you could put all these people, put a group of people into a box and say they're all like this. And this is, you know, it falls into the category of like confirmation bias, you know, where you've got, you know, two sets of information. You've got the real facts here, but then you've got what fits your narrative here, and you just dismiss the real facts because this set of facts, even though it's not facts, this set of facts, what you believe, is what you want to aspire to. So that's the mindset of the people that are embracing that sort of thing, is they're trying to fuel their narrative. But the reality of it is you can't put anybody in a box like that. That's like saying all black people are criminals, or all Jewish people are bankers or lawyers, you know, all white people are this or that. So one of the ways we break that down when we encounter that with, like, in the disengagement process with people is to kind of turn that around on them, because telling people they're wrong doesn't work. I mean, that's it rarely works. Nobody likes to admit they're wrong. But if you can show them that they're wrong, and offer them different perspectives, you can do that. So, for example, someone saying, well, all black people are criminals because of whatever reason, you know, make one up and put it in a box. And you say, okay, well, maybe all white people are serial killers, because most serial killers happen to be white. So all whites must be serial killers, right? You know, to somebody that's in the movement. Oh, no, of course not. I'm not a serial killer. Why would you say that? Not all white people are serial killers. That's insane. Okay. So why did you just say that about black people, all black people being criminals? Because that's the same concept. So showing them sometimes things like that. And there's one example I have that's kind of interesting. Was an individual that we had worked with that had been out of the movement for a decade, at least a decade by the time I talked to him. And he says, you know, brother, I'm still struggling with something. And I said, what is it? Let's talk about it. And he says, it's black people. And I said, okay, what is it about black people that's, you know, that you're still struggling with? And he says, well, there's this guy that lives down the street from us. And every day when my wife walks to work, he knows we're married. And every day when she walks to work, he tries to hit on her and pick her up and stuff. And he knows we're married. And he keeps doing it all the time. And I said, okay, um, can you think of anything else about black people? He goes, he thinks about it. Not really. No, it's just that. I said, okay, would it be okay if a white guy was sitting on your wife when she walked to work? No. You know, so I'm asking it in a couple different ways. Are you sure? Are you sure it's not okay? You know, and he goes, heck no. Why do you keep asking me that? It's not okay. And I said, well, this doesn't sound like a black issue to me. This sounds like you just got you know, SOB down the street, somebody that's not respectful. And it has nothing to do with his skin color. It has to do with the guy's just a jerk, you know, because you're telling me that it's not, there's nothing else that you can think of. And it's not okay if a white person or somebody else does it. So maybe it's just this guy's a jerk. And he stopped and he thought about it for a minute and he was like, whoa. Holy cow. Wow. So it was so simple, but he hadn't perceived it in that manner. And he thought maybe it was something that he was holding on to from his time in the movement. And in this particular instance, it wasn't. It was just he was just conditioned to think that way.
That's quite remarkable. In other words, you found out the psychology, the language, the Socratic dialogue of reason with people. And so you believe through that reasoning process, you can extend that disengagement. Is that correct? That's how you deepen the process within the individual.
Yes, we call it relational dialogue, and it's something that I learned from Daryl. Had been doing this work for 40 years, 30 or 40 years, and in Dia's case, she was just curious. She wasn't trying to disengage anybody. She was just trying to get the answers to why people were like this. Why are people racist? Why are people in these movements? And asking with curiosity and authenticity. So this process, I call it relational dialogue, and it's the main process we use in helping others disengage. And this was interesting as well, as when I was leaving the movement, I thought, the far right is this unique place, and I'm only going to be able to help people from that mindset because I know it. I spent my whole life in it. I was immersed in it for 27 years total, 25 running the organization. And so I understand it, and I can help these people. And soon what I learned after leaving, meeting people that had been in cults, meeting people that have been in gangs, people that have been involved in far left extremism like Antifa groups, meeting former Al-Qaeda and ISIS fighters, all the intersections of how there's a little bit different with gangs because there's some other different elements, a lot of times criminality and different things that come into play there. But with extremism specifically, the parallels are almost identical. And to me, that was shocking at first.
I know the parallels are identical on the left and on the right, you're saying.
Yes, to the not the ideologies are everywhere. They're all over the place. You can't, they're complete opposites when you talk right and left, and then when you talk religious extremism. But I'm saying the psychological holds, how they get people involved, how they hold them there, how they keep them in place, and how they radicalize is all very, very similar. You just replace the ideologies, but the drivers and the factors are really so similar. And that's something I learned by meeting with people that had come out of some of these other groups. So I took the processes that I had learned from meeting Daryl and Dia, along with a lot of the processes that I'd learned from being in the movement over the years, to help develop that relational dialogue. And that is in my opinion, other people might have different outlooks on it, but it's the main thing that we use at Beyond Barriers, which is our nonprofit, to help pull people out of and help people and families break free of any kind of extremism.
Do you think this is a one-by-one type of effort, that it always has to be to the specific individual, or do you think there's any hope to make a difference on a broader scale and either shut down these organizations, discredit them more broadly, or to inspire people in a larger way, a group kind of movement to leave? What do you think?
When it comes to radicalization and pulling people out, I think the individual approach is best. But if they never get there in the first place, that's the ideal. The best thing that we can do is help educate, help people understand, help people understand the different cultures and ethnicities and all these things that normally divide us and put us into these camps, to bring people together through our shared commonalities. So I think the educational process and having people have experiences and meet different people of different races, different backgrounds, different religions, and understand the culture and things like that. I mean, for me, the way I explain this to students in the schools, it's like opposite day, where you wear your clothes backwards. I said, that's my life, you guys. Like, I was saying all these terrible things about Jewish people. And when I actually met the Jewish community and had a chance to engage with them and understand them, it was literally the opposite of everything that I believed in. And that is a hard thing to swallow, but it's so true and it's so meaningful. It, when people hear that, and when you can show them that and they can experience that, it's mind-blowing. So having those, ideally, we don't want people to get into these extremist groups at all in the first place. But if they do, that's when we pull in the relational dialogue, and then groups like ours come into play to help people leave that. But ideally, if they never get involved in the first place, that's the best for society, because unfortunately, when people get radicalized, they can do really terrible things to other people, and we've seen that. And that's not to say all extremists are violent and that they're all doing these things to people. Many of them don't, but what it can do, especially if somebody's mentally unstable in the first place, it can draw that stuff out. And if you've already got all these problems, or you feel like you've got nothing to lose and your life means nothing, and this is a pretty common trajectory in these movements, where the cause, and even for me when I was involved, the cause meant everything, your life meant nothing. Just like I said to my grandfather, like I said, I don't care if they throw me in prison. I don't care if they kill me. I'll be a martyr for the cause. And that's how so many of them look at it. When you look at the most extreme examples I can think of is groups like ISIS, and sometimes you'll have reporters come along and they'll interview people that knew the families growing up, and this guy's beheading people. And they said, well, he was such a nice young man. He used to help little old ladies across the street. I don't understand how that happened. Now, our minds instantly go to, well, if he's somebody doing that, they're a psychopath or a sociopath. There's something really wrong with them. And in some cases, that's true. And those type of individuals tend to be drawn in higher percentages to extremist groups, but they're still the minority of all society, including in extremist groups. So a lot of times, these radicalized individuals, they will be doing these terrible things thinking they're serving God, or they're serving the cause. They're doing something noble and ideal, even though it's something absolutely horrific to other people. So we need to show people how that's not okay, and how it's sick. It's not something that's conducive for a healthy society. It's not conducive for the person that's in it, and certainly not conducive for the victims and the families of the victims.
Let me ask you a question about Tucker Carlson and having Nick Fuentes on a few weeks ago. From your perspective, Jeff, was this a watershed moment platforming Nick Fuentes? Is he a major threat to involving white males to, become anti-Semites and become, destructive extremists? What's your opinion on that?
Ooh, hot button issue on this one. I'm a little bit torn on the whole issue. Well, first of all, it's interesting because Nick Fuentes isn't white, so I mean that's interesting in and of itself. But having a major, and I'm not somebody that's about cancel culture, because typically if you cancel somebody, you're just driving them further into that echo chamber.
And that's what happened to you also. I noticed that when you're speaking, that just reinforced your anger, reinforced your commitment. So yeah.
Right. The way you see it is like, when at the time, like when my mother's career was pulled out from under her, she blamed me, and she was like, this is your fault. And technically it was, but in my mind, oh my gosh, the government is after my family. They're now they're so afraid of me and my truths and the things that I'm saying, they're going to start targeting my family members who have nothing to do with this. Guess what? I'm going to fight twice as hard. I'm going to take on the government, and I'm going to recruit an army to do it. And that's exactly what I was doing. So in that mindset, that's kind of what happens. But in the case of Tucker Carlson, here's somebody that still has a big platform, and you have that choice. You can invite people on, you can talk with people, and everybody's got that choice. But I think personally think it's a bad move to platform people that are advocating for terrible things. And Fuentes tries to be slick and say that he's not saying these things, or he's not saying certain things, but you can pull up videos and clips of him saying some of the most radical stuff that I've heard before, like really, really hateful stuff. And he'll try to downplay some of that stuff and say he didn't say it, but it's all out there. You can find it, especially in this day and age. That stuff is very easy to surface. And I think we have a responsibility, in a sense, to, maybe not cancel people or, completely boot them offline unless they're advocating for violence openly, breaking the law. That's different, I think, if you're advocating violence. So my approach on this is a little two-pronged, and I know I'm kind of going in a circle on it a little bit, because it's a delicate issue, because I'm a free speech absolutist on one hand, but and I don't believe in canceling because it makes things worse, I think, in a lot of cases. But at the same time, when you have a major platform, you have that choice about who you have on. Why do you want to have on somebody like that's that divisive and that's dividing people in the country? I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's patriotic. I certainly don't think from the standpoint of the right, if they're looking for different people to message and get out there, that platforming somebody that's dividing people is a good look. It's not a healthy way. If I was a strategist on the right, I would tell them that by affiliating with somebody like Nick Fuentes, you are going to damage your entire movement. And the far left, and I'll get to this in just a second, but it's called, there's a term for it. It's called reciprocal radicalization. And this is what we're seeing in American politics today, where the extremes on both sides, the right and the left, are fueling one another, and they're pulling more and more moderates from the moderate left and right out to those fringes, and that's really dangerous. And I think that's what Nick Fuentes and people like him are specifically doing, is they're fueling those narratives. So if the left is going to say everybody on the right's a Nazi, and you platform somebody like that guy, then they can say, look, it's true. It's true. They're racists. They're anti-Semites. That's what's going on there. It's just like what we said. So then they're going, so for anybody that's strategizing on the right, affiliating with him is toxic. You could almost say like a Trojan horse in a sense. And I'm not going into conspiracy theories or anything like that. That kind of stuff will come out later if it's true or if it's not. But it's not helping anybody. And it's also dividing society as a whole, even if you look at it from outside the political lens and you just say, this guy's causing racial hatred and animosity between people based on race and religion. That's not a healthy thing for anybody, politics aside.
Do you think that there's overlap between neo-Nazis and Groypers?
That might take a minute to answer that. When I was involved in the movement, I didn't like the alt-right, and most of the people on the hard right didn't. Those two groups did not get along. They clashed quite heavily for ideological reasons, other reasons. Some might say it's a generation gap or whatever, but I think there is some crossover to some degree. It may be greater now than it was before, but it's tough to say. So there's some of those groups, even amongst hard right groups and alt-right groups, they all fight amongst themselves as well. So they, a lot of people think when they look at it from the outside looking in, well, they must all get along because they all hate all the other races. They fight amongst themselves just as much. In fact, a lot of times the violence is internalized, and it's internal, or it's with other crews that might believe slightly different, have a different religious outlook, a different political outlook, different leadership, different power struggles. It could be anything. In some cases, these groups, somebody ticks off the leader, takes away their girlfriend or something, and now there's another splinter faction, so it could be literally anything they fight amongst themselves. Yes.
And Jeff, finally, I was wondering if people want to find out about your work, the de-radicalization work you're doing, where do they go to find out more information about your trainings and about your workshops?
So you can go to beyondbarriersusa.org or jeffschoep.com. I also do a lot of work with, and I didn't have a chance to mention it yet, but I do a lot of work in collaboration with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which is an international Jewish human rights organization. And then they tackle all kinds of, human rights issues for all people across the globe, and do a lot of good work with them as well. And I'm a
Please
speaker
take a
with.
minute to tell us what you're doing with them. I would love to hear.
Sure. So my work with the Wiesenthal Center, when I first left the movement in 2019, when I felt like I was ready to speak out about it, it was around August or September of 19. I published my website, and I denounced the movement, officially did a press release and all that. Within 2 days of that website going up, within just a couple of days, I get an email from the director of research, Rick Eaton, at the Simon Wiesenthal Center. And in the movement, all I knew about the Simon Wiesenthal Center was that they were hunting old Nazi war criminals and things like that. So it was a pretty scary organization from the movement's perspective. So I get this email, and Rick had said, "Hey, I saw your website. Would you be interested in meeting up?" And I thought, oh boy. Part of me was like super curious, because I thought, like, really hadn't had much engagement with the Jewish community. What could this be all about? But then I remembered Wiesenthal Center would track down war criminals and stuff. So I'm thinking, uh-oh, what if they're coming for me now, that I'm out of the movement? So I remember telling my girl at the time, I'm going to go meet with this guy, but if I don't come home, and I always get a lot of chuckles out of this in the Jewish community when I'm speaking out. I said, if I don't come home, it means I'm on an involuntary extradition to Israel. So, but I went
That's what you
anyway. So
believed.
I mean, I didn't really believe that, but it was, like there's that little 1% in the back of your head. It's like, um, what if, so I always prepare for worst case scenarios. But what I found, when I had met with Rick, he had said, so I saw your website. What are you looking to do with your life now? What do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to, in my mind, I didn't know anything about civilian life. I didn't know what life was like outside of the movement. I hadn't been outside of the movement ever. I got involved as a teenager. So I was like, well, I just want to be a peace builder. I want to use my skill set for something good, and to be able to repair some of the damage that I've done, and speak out against it or whatever. And I don't know quite what that looks like, but maybe you guys do. And he says, yeah, and that's really awesome. Maybe we can help with that. But do you think you're ready? And I said, sure, I'm ready. And I was very confident about this at the time. I was like, I'm a public speaker. That's what I do. It's all what I've done my whole life. Easy. No problem. No problem. Rick raises his eyebrow and he goes, I don't think this is going to be quite as easy as you think it is, Jeff. And I was like, why not? It's no problem. And he says, you're used to railing against illegal immigrants, talking about the movement, getting up in front of audiences, doing that sort of thing. This is something you've never done before. Talk about yourself. And he's right. In the movement, you don't talk about yourself, because the self is not what's important. The cause is. So, and I just remember thinking at the time, well, it's not as hard as Rick is going to think this is. I can do this. And the first time I had spoke in the U.S., well, the first time I spoke out publicly was in Turkey, actually. But about a month after that, Simon Wiesenthal Center had me come to I'm going to get the name of this wrong, but it was a hate crimes state of California hate crimes summit or something. It was basically senators and state reps and things like that getting together, lawmakers, to increase the hate crimes legislation. And I had spoken at that, and someone had someone had mentioned to me right before I was going up to speak. They said, "Well, how does it feel being out in this area again in California?" And I said, "I love California. It's great. I like this area." He goes, "That's not what I meant. This area, like your organization was very active in this area." And I hadn't really thought about that until he mentioned it. I was like, "Oh my gosh, you're right." And it's like everything that I had planned to say just like went out the window because I was like, "Man, I gotta apologize to this community." And so that was the first thing I did. And I never uh, doubted Rick's wisdom after that again, because I tell you what, getting out in front of a crowd of people and saying you were wrong, that is something I had never done before. And it was one of the hardest things you could possibly imagine, to say you're wrong, apologize to people, and then it's just hard. It's hard even. It's hard to. It's a hard thing. It's still a hard thing, but
Right.
it's the right thing to do.
Well,
Sorry.
Jeff, I want to thank you for your tremendous work, and we're looking forward to having you back in the future to go even deeper than we did today. And I suggest everybody goes out and purchases an Amazon American Nazi: From Hate to Humanity. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with all your work, Jeff.
It's an honor to be here, sir. Thank you. Thank you both for having me.